Welcome to the High Rise Podcast, presented by Headset, the leading data and analytics company for the cannabis industry.
Welcome back to the High Rise, a laid-back, data-back conversation where we talk all things cannabis, from U.S. MSOs to Canadian LPs, products, and market analysis through the lens of data. I am joined, as always, by Emily Paxia of Poseidon.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the High Rise.
It is great to be back, and again, I am on travel. It seems to be the case these days. Went from zero travel to an event every week, and I think next week I get a bit of a reprieve, but then after that, we'll be at Trailblazers and then MJ Biz, probably recording some podcasts from there with some interesting guests, so pretty excited about that.
Very excited. I think it's going to be fun to take this on the road. I'll just say that.
Totally. It has been really great to see all these old faces and new faces and just kind of reconnect. And so it's a good opportunity to bring them onto the show to get some of their perspective on all this stuff that's happening. But I'm in New York today. I was out here for the Business of Cannabis, which was at the Rainbow Room at Rockefeller Center. Really good turnout. It was kind of a policy discussion. If I had to kind of encapsulate it like to one thing, I came to talk about, what we're expecting to see in the New York market. And it's pretty exciting. I thought we could maybe touch on some of that before we get into the news. But they did have some great people there, like the New York State Senator Kruger, who helped basically wrote the legislation. And she had a lot of good opinions. And it's always a good reminder, that this stuff, we talk about all these new markets opening up, new states legalizing, and it doesn't just happen, that it takes people to put in the effort. And with New York, it was years in the making, years. I think she said about 5 or 6 years. And she had a great anecdote about the previous governor, Cuomo, not being interested in it. They introduced adult use, the idea of adult use, which forced Cuomo to introduce medical because he wanted to get in front of that. So it was a way to kind of hold off adult use, but then of course, with medical, then the trend usually is adult use follows, and that's very much the case. So pretty interesting anecdotes, but overall a good conference. I'm excited to talk a little bit about New York, if that sounds good to you.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, after spending time in New York this past summer, hearing all of the excitement from potential entrepreneurs and the ability to open up shops, and it's an exciting market, and I think it's going to be a really great tentpole on the East Coast for not just opening and being a market, but creating value into the bigger national market and actually probably globally. So I'm pretty into it. And it is true. I remember when I was on the board of the Marijuana Policy Project multiple years ago now, New York was really, even then, was still trying to push for adult use. So years and years have gone by. And it does feel like the new governor has really prioritized it and is moving more efficiently in the process. So that's good.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the new governor has moved things along in a much faster capacity than what we saw already with some appointments. And I think it's going to, roll out in a more effective way because of that. But yeah, what we're excited about and kind of what I talked about was, the size of the market. It is the most anticipated market, I think, for adult use since California. Going to be a sizable market. When it's mature, it's going to be upwards of $3 billion a year in sales, and I think will continue to grow from there. It has a great framework set out for channel access, like in the sense of where you can purchase and consume cannabis. That's very modern, by kind of the existing markets. You're seeing on-premise consumption. There's rules now where you can consume cannabis wherever you can smoke tobacco here in New York, which is an amazingly progressive stance. I think they have these micro licenses, which will be pretty interesting to watch, and how those licenses are getting issued, I think, will be kind of to be determined. But this idea that micro licenses can be vertically integrated, yet there is no vertical integration in New York, which I think will really create an interesting brand and product landscape. Anytime we see a market that has no vertical integration like Washington, or maybe limited vertical integration in the sense of like California, where you can be just a producer. You can be vertically integrated as well, but we see a lot more brands when that's the case. In a market like Washington State, a typical retailer will carry over 1,500 unique products at any given time. It's 1,500. It is a big number. I mean, how long would it take you just to like look at each one of those products, And you compare that to something like Florida, which is completely vertically integrated. So the dispensaries there have to produce and process their own products, carry on average of, I believe it's under 50, I think between 40 and 50 products. And it's just a different world. So I think New York is going to look a lot more like Washington, maybe not as extreme, but that's, to me, more, in a way, more interesting, because it's like a lot of opportunity for new brands to emerge and just kind of fight it out. In California, we've talked about this at length, like these single state operators, super state operators in California say, if I can win in California, at Hall of Flowers last week, that I can win anywhere. And I think it's going to be the same story with New York. And I think you're going to see the California brands coming to New York and other brands from other markets, but you're going to see a lot of homegrown brands because of what New York is known for, for a lot of trend setting and design and art and fashion, right, and brand building. So that's going to be quite exciting. So all in all, I can't wait. I think it's 2023 is what everyone's expecting. Is that still accurate?
That's what we're holding to, and the recent progress does seem to put us on that trajectory. So that's our vision. It's going to be an exciting year when that opens.
Totally. And to that end, in the news cycle this week, Columbia Care started cultivation at this 34-acre facility in Long Island to supply the New York metro area. The headline is that they're starting the first phase of cultivation, 30,000 square feet of canopy, the perpetual harvest cycle in Q4, which is, we're in Q4 at this point. And so, with 2023 coming up, they're already starting production, which is good. And I'm sure there's others, beyond Columbia Care that are looking at it. One of the things with new markets always, and no surprise here, but it's like supply and demand constraints. And often it's like, so there's never enough supply in the beginning. So do you think with news like this that there's a chance that it may do it a little better than others?
Well, sometimes we get to actually learn from what has happened in previous markets, and I think this is an example of it. I think that Columbia Care has really invested in New York State for years. They've had locations in the state, and it's been a difficult medical market, extraordinarily limited. And I think what they're doing is they're looking a year out. I mean, you're absolutely right. We're in Q4. I can't believe that happened. But as of Q4 2022, people have better be ready to get those doors open when January comes, or February, whatever the official days of the opening are. But I think it's very smart to start thinking about backfilling on the infrastructure around cultivation, because it is always the challenge. And we've seen this in every market that has turned on. And so I think it's time to learn from that. And so they're leaning in on this. And I think last show we also talked about the potential that maybe New York will start to open up a little bit more on their medical program, which would make sense as we're going into adult use, and the existing medical program is really lacking. So I'm hopeful. We saw there was a big article out this week at the beginning of the week from Forbes about Ben Kovler and about GTI, and they are really leaning in on turning that old prison into a cultivation facility as well. And so they're already leaning in on building that out. And so it's really an investment today in the potential for tomorrow. And I think it's very wise of these operators, because when we open the doors, I mean, some of these markets, you see well over $5,000 a pound in the wholesale for cannabis. And so I think if they're going this way, it's, they'll see a return on their investment once that starts. For what it's worth, the cultivation piece of this business is everything is difficult in these cannabis businesses, but cultivation is the wild card. And so I think getting these facilities online, getting them open and starting to grow, you can get your kinks out before the big show. So I think it's pretty important.
Yeah. And you're right. I mean, at this point, there's so many markets that we can learn from. So it's good that they're taking a page here and trying to get in front of it. And as part of this news, Columbia Care mentioned that they are opening 4 additional medical dispensaries in New York. So that may very well help with some of the access. Medical has been a pretty small market. I think in 2020 it did 70 million in sales, which is what the adult use market is going to be doing at least that monthly. When it opens up, and that's year one, which will certainly grow into a much bigger market. But opening 8 dispensaries, I think they have 4 currently active. I think it's 4 is the cap, and 3 of them will be adult use co-location if the licensing approves it. So maybe to last week's point, it is an opportunity to expand the medical side ahead, which would be good. You look at medical programs like Florida with a number of patients. I think Florida's got like 500,000 patients. And I think they did about certainly over $1 billion in sales across 300 plus dispensaries. You compare that to New York, and New York's population, it's much smaller. So maybe more access there will be good. And then with the adult use, obviously, they're going to need to really ramp up not only supply, but making sure that there are the stores and the access. And we've seen that time and time again, too, where in California, like we always talk about, there's just not enough stores for the consumers. And you end up with a lot of sales happening in the illicit market because of that. So hopefully, New York gets this right. But exciting to be here. I'm very excited to watch this roll out and look forward to what 2022 is going to look like, because I think it's going to be a lot of news, a lot of things we're going to be tracking as they start to announce how licenses are going to be issued, who gets them, and so on. And it'll be quite fascinating to see who's going to win this market. So moving on, a couple news items I wanted to cover. One pretty notable item: Tumblr apparently announced that they are going to allow cannabis advertising in select markets. I think California was one of those markets. It seems to be, with like Apple kind of loosening some of their restrictions on, allowing commerce in apps in markets with legal frameworks, and now Tumblr. For those that may not be familiar with Tumblr, it was an early, I guess, blogging platform. Really easy to post content. They ended up selling to Yahoo for $1 billion, I think, or somewhere around $1 billion. Maybe during Marissa Mayer's tenure there. And then when Yahoo got bought by Verizon, I think Verizon ended up separating from Tumblr, and I think they recently sold to Automatic, which is the WordPress company, for $3 million. So it's quite a long fall for that brand, but it's a mainstream brand. I have to believe there's still a lot of people leveraging Tumblr, and being allowed to advertise there as a cannabis company is interesting. We're so limited, and that's why there's so many companies out there, Weed Maps of the world and Leaflies of the world, that try and create outlets for cannabis marketing. But maybe this is the start of things loosening. Maybe Tumblr's the beginning, and we'll start to see more and more of this. And next thing you know, it's Instagram. Next thing you know, it's Google. What do you think? Do you think this is an indicator that that's coming?
I mean, I think it's an indicator that they're looking at ways to generate revenue, and cannabis advertising is super low-hanging fruit because operators, everybody in this industry would love another platform on a digital front to advertise on. And, some of my portfolio companies have gotten pretty creative, and they've advertised on some of the porn platforms. Porn and cannabis are not totally in separate spheres, because we all kind of deal with this idea of being pushed into the corner, and yet it makes a lot of money. So there's something interesting about that. But yeah, being able to advertise on a more mainstream platform like this, I think it's an encouraging signal, and I think people will jump on it. I don't know the data around Tumblr anymore. I have to imagine that Medium has probably created additional, moving on from that platform, from bloggers to people who kind of want to write thought pieces on Medium. But, I think it's great. And to your point, it's another mainstream company. We've talked about Amazon. We've been talking about the different groups that are jumping in on the space, like the Koch brothers. And so Tumblr's here now too. And I also think, we saw Nike kind of stand up behind cannabis issues around the Olympics. So, it's something I'm excited about, and I think this is the big thing. We actually wrote an article about this. Celia put it out there from our team, but about how, in the absence of government being the one to progress this industry, private industry is stepping in and making clear that their intention is to start moving this forward. So,
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the pornography piece because Tumblr also, I think, had a pretty prominent user base that was leveraging it for that. And back in
oh,
back in 2018, December of 2018, they ended up banning all adult content on their platform, and I think their traffic plummeted. Something like almost 20% of their blog communities were related to that type of content. I don't know the timing wise on like the sale to Yahoo, but I'm sure it had something to do with that. But
sure.
it's a funny kind of turnaround because there is those same parallels, right? So it's like that's not okay, but this is okay. Certainly, different types of content, but there are connections there, I think, to be had. So
I think it's
go
great that
ahead.
OnlyFans course corrected on that very quickly. So that was good.
Right, right. I think they had to. Like there's gonna be nothing left if they didn't. In
Nothing.
other news, the California DCC, which is the Department of Cannabis Control, we've talked about at length, particularly like a month ago when Nicole Elliott took the helm there. For those that may or may not remember, it's a newish department in California that was set up to really combine the regulatory licensing and enforcement of the industry under one agency, one regulator, instead of separate regulators. And California has this challenge where something like 75% of all licenses are provisional. Not many active annual licenses. There was, I think, three different kind of guidelines for the industry that people had to navigate, and it's just quite a mess. It made it really hard for people to basically be active in the market. And so they set out a month ago with a $150 million budget, I think a team of 400 people. And the news this week was that the proposed consolidated regulations that they talked about doing have been approved in a month's time. I think that's pretty impressive for government.
Yeah, they're definitely moving along. I think the operators in the state wish they would move more quickly and that they'd have a swifter response to the illicit operators. But I think that they're definitely the amount of progress. It's just like in New York, the amount of progress we've seen since the DCC came together versus before that is it's notable. And so I'm excited to see how this continues to shake out. And I'm hoping that this will have been kind of one of the last low points of the California market as they get this thing ramped up and really supporting the industry. So
I
I'm
tried to
looking
take a
forward to it.
Yeah, me too. And I tried to take a look at the regulations, but it's quite an extensive document, and I didn't get very far in it. But I did see some headlines that trade samples are now approved, which is interesting. Apparently, they weren't approved. I'm sure there were ways around that, but just stuff like that has got to help in a big way for the industry. So yeah, good first step. I feel like a month in, and I'm sure more to come from the DCC, which hopefully will be reflected in more sales in California. In LP and MSO news, I guess let's start with the U.S. MSOs. I thought this was an interesting headline, actually. Jushi purchased the Apothecarium, Nevada, which is in Las Vegas, I think not too far from the strip there. It is interesting, I think, for a couple reasons. I mean, obviously, Jushi expanding into another market. I think this is their first Nevada store, if I'm not mistaken, is good to see. But what's also interesting is that Apothecarium now I associate with TerrAscend and some of their moves in the East Coast and so on. And I was doing a little research, and I remember way back there was news about Apothecarium and TerrAscend, early news in 2019, and after they acquired the California operations, they were going to pick up the Nevada operations. I think originally is what they had announced, and then I think a few months after the deal fell through for unknown reasons, and here we are with Jushi coming in picking it up. So I have to assume that Jushi is going to turn this into a Beyond Hello, which is their retail brand. It seems to be everything is folded under that. I don't think I've seen a Jushi store that's a different brand, and this does seem to be the trend, like with Columbia Care and believe it's the Cannabis that they're trying to convert all of their stores to. I saw this week one of their Massachusetts stores going from, I think, Patriot Care, I think that was called, to the Cannabis. So you're seeing more of that. So I think that Jushi would do that, but I didn't see anything in the announcement. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's my take that they may not rush to change it, and there may be a transition while they let the customers kind of understand what is happening and that it is becoming a different brand. But I can't imagine that they'll keep the Apothecarium brand because, to your exact point, TerraSend is known for Apothecarium in California, and now they've been opening the Apothecarium stores in New Jersey. So it's a tight brand integration at this point, but I do think when I look at the Beyond Hello stores, which I have not actually been into one, but when I see them online and then I've been in multiple Apothecarium stores, I do think they could actually pretty easily rebrand it. The Apothecarium stores are just very beautiful and well laid out, and so it's good bones to work with, so to speak. So I would imagine that could happen.
Yeah, and I wonder if, I'm sure part of this may be related to the new on-premise that's coming to Nevada, on-premise consumption lounges. I would imagine that, if I was Jushi, it'd be interesting to see, how you can execute on that, particularly if you have interest in the New York market, since it's going to be available here too. It's a good kind of testing ground to kind of figure out that consumer experience because it's so new, and I don't think anyone can point to one that's the way it's going to be, and there's room for that to be defined. Las Vegas, may not translate to New York in the same way, but there's probably some learnings that they can glean from, having access to the Nevada market. That'd be interesting to
Absolutely.
see.
Yeah, I mean, Nevada especially Las Vegas, is a cross section of America. Every walk of life kind of passes through there. So you certainly can learn from it. That was the famous move by CBS, the media channel. They had done all of their market testing on new content in Las Vegas, and it was a complete turnaround moment for them. But I think it's a great testing ground, and Vegas is it's interesting how it's become I feel like it's become a bigger part of the dialogue around the cannabis industry because of the opening of the pending opening of the social consumption and what that can look like and what those experiences will reflect in terms of consumer preferences. So it's pretty interesting. Jushi is kind of a younger MSO in terms of you've got the kind of the big five that have been around for a while and they're pretty huge. And then you've got this other tier, which is where Jushi kind of lives. And they've been making pretty aggressive moves for the past 12 months. So I think they're positioning themselves well for when the market starts to pick back up again from a public market investor standpoint. I think that investors digging in are going to see they have some pretty interesting assets. So one to watch.
Definitely one to watch. I feel like I saw some headline, and maybe I'm mistaken, but Planet 13, which is also another big Las Vegas location and now in Orange County, California as well, is continuing to expand their stores. Yeah, here's the headline from MG Magazine mentioning they're doubling their dispensary square footage and adding 40 registers. So continuing to get larger, maybe for those reasons, that Nevada is becoming a more important part of the narrative. So more to come, I am sure, from that market. I'm excited to see those lounges and how that executes. We'll be there in October here, but I don't think the lounges will be open yet. Will they?
No.
Not yet. No. Yeah.
I don't think so, but we can still go to the tiki bar, and I have already booked the karaoke place.
Perfect. And then in 2022, we're going to have to figure out how to fit in a on-premise lounge as well when those are open.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So on to LP news. Feels like it's been a while since we've talked about Canadian LPs earnings season coming out. I don't have comprehensive coverage right now of all the Canadian earnings, but I did run across the Aurora earnings this week. I thought this was interesting. Aurora, set up to be one of the largest adult use brands. I remember in the beginning of Canadian legalization, adult use, they were very strong on their marketing. It felt like kind of Aurora and Canopy Growth were really kind of some of the biggest making the biggest impact. And obviously the dynamics have shifted quite a bit since then. The Aphria-Tilray merger, creating the largest, and other mergers that, may or may not be creating the larger LPs than that. But Aurora, has still been there. But what's so interesting, I think, about this quarter's revenue was they call out the medical cannabis net revenue rose almost 10% compared to prior year, with strong margins of 68%. And so they explicitly are calling out medical years into adult use, where I feel like kind of going against the grain, I would say, from what everybody else is talking about and doubling down on. I'm sure the medical market is there. I'm sure it's growing at some rate, but it can't be growing nearly as fast as the adult use rate. So it is an interesting kind of observation that they made. What do you think?
I don't know. I feel like the adult use market has not wowed people the way that they thought it would back when it was opening, and the LPs have continued to falter. They just laid off a bunch of people at Aurora, yet they have access to a lot more liquidity in their markets, so they just have a different dynamic up there. So I don't know. I think it's a weird choice. It feels like it's backward looking. I think if we're going to start talking about the new unlocking of medical markets, I would be thinking about it more as a truly almost like pharmaceutical aspect of medical cannabis, not the medical cannabis of yesterday. So I think, which has tremendous wellness and medical benefits, but I think that when I think about the large tail of the unlocking of the medical market is when we see more of a global pharmaceutical play. I don't think Aurora is necessarily set up for that, but this is where we all get to differ. I've never really taken a shine to that company.
Right.
So
yeah, fair enough.
It is what it is.
Totally. And I think you're not wrong. I mean, the medical LP markets where, Canada got started with mail order medical, quite different than other medical markets, but you're right, the pharma seems to be the big one. I mean, talking to the Oscar guys and talking about some of the Europe stuff and pharma focused, it does seem to be the play if you're talking medical. He has a quote in Business Insider from an article this week, the CEO of Aurora mentioning, in this quote, he says, "The fact that everyone is just so consumed by the idea that only rec cannabis matters, I think is a fallacy." It's interesting, I think, for a couple reasons. One, talking about it being a fallacy, like everyone's a little bit wrong here, but also calling it rec, not adult use. They're not incorporating like kind of the wellness piece of the business. It's just strictly recreational. An interesting statement. I mean, it's a way to get headlines, I guess, by kind of really being...
they're very good at getting headlines. No, I mean, and also, by the way, not everybody's quote unquote obsessed with adult use. So it's also like an assumption. A lot of us have invested in the bigger pharma play going forward because the thing that people should recognize is that cannabis as a pharmaceutical or medical product is part of a larger shift in what pharma and medical is going to look like going forward. There's all this work being done on psychedelics, ketamine, therapeutically assisted treatments around these different compounds. And so I think I'm seeing more and more funds being formed around alternative wellness investing. And so I don't think he's correct to say that that nobody cares and that we're all thinking about adult use, because it's just incorrect. I think we're thinking about it in the forward-looking way, not the backward-looking way. And so that's how I would reframe that commentary.
Yeah, no, great point. And their net revenue, net of provisions of $54.8 million. It says compared to $55.2 million in the prior quarter, so down a bit, and $67.5 million in the year ago period. So certainly not going the right direction. And Canada is growing. Talking about the New York market.
Yeah.
When New York hits $3 billion, that's basically what Canada did last year. It's on track, I think, well over 4 this year, but it is growing. And when you have businesses like Aurora, it's not, I see how their medical business is growing, and maybe, everyone's looking over at adult use. People are making, their competitors are making investments in the U.S., that we've talked about, whether it's beverage brands or CBD or what have you, and they're saying, well, we're going to maybe do medical. I could see how they try and pick a different lane, basically, where, you know, how they could come to that kind of conclusion. But we'll see if it plays out long term, or maybe next quarter it'll be something different that they talk about.
Yeah, I think we are going to continue to learn about massive investments from the Canadian LPs into U.S. companies over the next quarter. I think we'll be seeing quite a few, because I know they're trying to build more and more inroads into these markets. So it'll be interesting.
Absolutely. So I think that'll do it this week. We'll be back on our regular scheduled programming next week, but then the week after, I think you're going to get some special episodes as we look to do some unique interviews with some, I think, very interesting people in the space. So look for those. And if you're enjoying the podcast, please leave us a rating or a review on your favorite podcast app, and find us on Twitter. We're always around. So with that, we'll see you all next week.
Thanks for listening to the High Rise Podcast, presented by Headset. For more information on Headset, visit headset.io.